Human beings under capitalism have grown up in a world that has shaped our ego in a very dangerous way, in a way that ultimately causes unnecessary pain for both ourselves and those we interact with. Under capitalism, we have been socialized into protecting and building up our ego rather than recognizing it, dismantling it, and diminishing it. This makes it incredibly difficult for us to love both ourselves and others unconditionally. So, what is our ego? I see it as your own conception of yourself, including a person's sense of self-importance. It fuels that unpleasant feeling you get when you're losing an argument or when somebody cuts you off in traffic. And it is shaped by the norms and values of our society. We've been taught it's good to win and to be ashamed of losing. We've been taught it's good to hold power and belittling not to. We've been taught it's good to be right and humiliating to be wrong. Utilizing shame and pride, we have constructed the typical human ego into something very fragile and irrational. Because of our ego, we have learned to love ourselves conditionally. We find it hard to love ourselves without thinking we're good enough. That awful feeling you get when you didn't get that job you wanted or you got rejected is you loving yourself conditionally. It is your ego saying to yourself, I love you on the condition that you get this job, or on the condition that this person agrees to go on a date with you. It is possible in those situations to say to yourself, I love you regardless of anything. So you didn't get the job. I love you unconditionally. But it only comes as a result of us working on our egos. So we are taught to love ourselves conditionally. In turn, we are taught to love others conditionally. We're taught to be both destructive to ourselves and to others in love, in how we are taught to love somebody under the conditions of them giving themselves to us and fulfilling our wants and needs. This effectively results in it being the case that when we say, I love you, we kind of mean, I love you, so do things that make me happy. Not, I love you, so do things that make you happy. Under capitalism, we have been taught to be incredibly possessive of money, objects, people, especially people we are romantically engaged with. Ownership is also a form of power. So the ego fuels possessiveness because the ego has been trained to want to hold power. This means that the ego is in want of owning their loved one. And this creates dysfunction and unhealthy power dynamics in relationships. It also creates problems in our relationships because we're constantly trying to stifle the other person's autonomy in name of our love for them, with the ego saying, I love you on the condition that you fulfill my wants and needs. We are taught, for instance, that if we are in a relationship with somebody who wants to have sex with somebody else, which is a very natural thing to want, and even if they never would, that is a reflection of ourselves not being good enough, and it hurts the ego, rather than the more rational approach of it not really being anything to do with us and not a representation of their love for us. We call this jealousy. That's what jealousy is. It's the ego. It hurts because it is your ego saying to you, that person possesses something that you don't have, and therefore you are worth less than them. Romantic jealousy is very normalized and actually romanticized under capitalism, which is appalling because it very much perpetuates conditionally loving our partners and is also used as a rationale for abuse, often in the form of violence. Egos are easily hurt and are in want of protecting themselves, and will do so at the expense of others, even if we supposedly love them. Our egos are the fundamental reason why love normally doesn't work out. Furthermore, capitalism commodifies love. It's something to be had. I mean, we literally have married couples pretending they are happy when they are god-awful miserable, because it is important to them to be seen to possess love. It's seen as a reflection of the self if somebody has a loving partner, and to perform being a loving partner. It shows that they are worthy of love and that they are good at love and giving it. I would argue, for all of these reasons, that most romantic relationships have at least some unhealthy dynamics because we literally aren't taught how to love. We're taught a version of love that is inherently based in power dynamics, which don't create the permission or circumstances for unconditional love to flourish. And ultimately, it creates unnecessary pain. If you are in a relationship with an abusive person, they aren't loving you unconditionally. They love you based on the conditions that they can fuel their ego through abusing you. Or maybe that you give them, or even they take, sex from you. Whatever the conditions are, there are conditions. The people who have intentionally inflicted the most pain upon my being have done so in the name of love. They loved me, and when I didn't give them myself in a way that they wanted me to, they actively tried to hurt me. That's not love. That just isn't love. That is the capitalist distortion of what we have been trained to understand as care. There's a part of me that is terrified of people falling in love with me, because in the past that resulted in them treating me awfully and people excusing it. It is very socially acceptable to be awful to somebody you are in love with, because people can relate to that pain that the ego is in. Ultimately, conditional love creates pain. And it's usually painful being either the provider or the reciprocator of it. The Jesuit priest Anthony de Mello said of unconditional love, "You must say to your loved one in your mind, I leave you free to be yourself, to think your thoughts, to indulge your tastes, to follow your inclination, to behave in any way that you decide is to your liking. Then think to yourself, how do you feel about that? If it describes your feelings, then your love is probably unconditional. If not, then your love may be an unhealthy clinging, and maybe you want to examine it carefully. Your understanding of love may be based on societal expectations of people, of relationships, and of relationship dynamics. The only way we can find true love is by loving somebody unconditionally without the ego. The only way we cannot be in pain ourselves is by loving ourselves unconditionally without the ego. And of course, the real joy of love is loving, not being loved.